Welcome to the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast, a celebration of craft, commerce, and community. I'm your host, Matthew Félix, and today we're going to talk about that last one in the list, craft, commerce, and community. We're going to talk about community. What is it really? And why is it so important to us as writers? And how do we find it? Well, it's such a big, daunting question that, of course, I couldn't answer it myself, so I've invited two people from my own community to help me answer that. LAURIE Ann Doyle is the author of World Gone Missing, winner of the Nautilus Award in Fiction, and praised by best-selling author Peter Orner as, quote, a gorgeous debut, and he would know. Recipient of the Alligator Juniper National Fiction Award and a Pushcart Prize nomination, LAURIE's stories and essays have appeared in McSweeny's, Alta Journal, the Los Angeles Review, and lots of other places, as well as being anthologized in Speak and Speak Again and Road Story. LAURIE teaches writing at UC Berkeley Extension and the Writers' Grotto in San Francisco. Ryan Sloan is a novelist and essayist who teaches writing at the University of California, Berkeley. Like LAURIE, Ryan has been nominated for the Pushcart Prize, which makes me the only one who has not, by the way, which seems really unfair, and his work has been published or is forthcoming in LA Weekly, Joyland Magazine, Opium Magazine, and many other publications. Ryan has done multiple residencies, including the 2021 Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference, the 2019 Lit Camp Writers Conference, and the 2019 Arctic Circle residency on the Summer Solstice exhibition. Welcome, LAURIE and Ryan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so usually I would jump into questions for my guests, but today, just for a few minutes, I'm going to make it all about me. And so hopefully, LAURIE and Ryan, you guys have something to do for just a few minutes. It's going to take 2 or 3 minutes. But I'm going to do that because I think this question of community is a really big one for writers. And, I think that community, and for me also specifically, I think that community is a term that we use a lot. It gets thrown around a lot, but for writers, it really is something that's very important, which is why I wanted to do, this show today. It seems weird for me now, but when I was getting started as a writer, I actually found it really hard to find community, even though I live in the middle of San Francisco. I looked for writing groups, but to no avail. Either they weren't accepting members or they'd been discontinued by the time I found them. I thought about joining. Someone told me about the Writers' Grotto, which we're going to talk about today. I just mentioned in LAURIE's bio. They were full. There was a waiting list to join, and at the time, I didn't have the self-confidence. The imposter syndrome would have prevented me from joining them anyway. I never would have felt up to that, right? I did take a writing class, but it was so basic because I had been doing professional writing for a long, long time. And so the writing class I took was just a little too basic. So I ended up actually dropping out of that. So whether it was just timing or luck, I didn't have success when I was initially trying to kind of find my own writing community. So I ended up spending the 10 years that it took to write my novel sort of in that garret that so many writers end up in, just by myself with no community, working on my book, and little outside contact or little contact with the outside world insofar as writing was concerned. It wasn't until I got to late in that process with my novel and needed to engage an editor, then beta readers, then as we got closer to publication, cover designer, line editors, other people started to get involved in my writing. But even then, it really wasn't community. It was more I was engaging people for services. So finding community didn't happen for me until considerably later when, for some reason, and I don't remember exactly why I decided to go, but in 2017, I decided to go to the Book Passage Travel Writers and Photographers Conference. Now, I say I don't know why I decided to go because I had written one travel book, but I wasn't necessarily going to focus that on travel writing going forward. But for whatever reason, I guess I'd heard good things about the conference. I decided to go. That conference changed everything for me insofar as community is concerned. First of all, besides meeting lots of great people, I realized, oh wait, I do belong here. Like these are my people, which I hadn't had until then. For a whole decade, I'd been writing and I hadn't had that. So that was the first revelation. Another sort of corollary to that was I realized not only do I have a lot to learn, which I already knew, but I also had a lot to give, which I hadn't realized. Again, not being surrounded by other writers. So again, that was quite a revelation. Out of that conference, I ended up, some of the people that I met in the conference, we ended up forming a writing group. And so that was first my first conference and then my first writing group, which further solidified those relationships that I had started at the conference. Then as the time went on, I started meeting people 1 or 2 people removed from people I had met at the conference. And so my circle just got bigger and bigger that way. Somebody I met at the conference, Linda Watanabe McFerrin, very accomplished writer and all-around fantastic human being, she invited me to join her group, Left Coast Writers. And so there again, all of a sudden, I was connecting with this whole other group of people that I hadn't known before. Through Left Coast Writers, I got invited to appear on a podcast for the first time as interviewee. Well, 2 weeks later, I had my own podcast, even though I barely even listened to podcasts at the time, if at all. And that podcast obviously served as another platform for me to make all these connections with writers I wouldn't have had reason to connect with otherwise, right? So lastly then, through the combination of attending the Book Passage Conference, getting into podcasting, I made my way to the San Francisco Writers Conference, and of course to where we are right here, right now, which is doing the programming and actually hosting the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast. So I say all that, or I share all that for a few reasons. One, I want to really underscore, it only took one action for everything to kind of explode, for this domino effect. I went from being completely isolated as a writer for a decade to going to one conference and all of these doors getting thrown open. So I just really wanted to tell that story to underscore that for writers, particularly those who are getting started, but maybe you have been writing for 5 years though, and you're in that garret that so many of us end up in, that it really only takes one action. And we're going to talk about a lot of different actions we can take, but that's the one that I started with. Second reason I wanted to share that story was to underscore that not only do we not have to go it alone as writers, but we shouldn't. I wasted so much time and effort and emotional energy on things that I wouldn't have had to worry about if I had just had a writer friend to say, what about this? What about that? And so those are just 2 reasons why again, I wanted to do this episode today, and why I'm also so excited to hear Laurie and Ryan's takes and their respective experiences related to this, because particularly, like I said, for writers just starting out, I think it can be really, really useful. So that's my story. Thank you for bearing with me. But Laurie, let's start with you. And I'm just curious, without necessarily being quite as verbose as I just was, can you tell us though how you started to kind of make your way into the world and make connections with other writers?
Well, first, I just want to say thanks for having me. And, this is creating community. What we're doing right now is creating community. We're reaching out to you virtually. But I think there's a way that there's a feeling of comradeship that is engendered by this. In terms of a great example I can bring forward is that a bunch of us went to USF MFA program together. And we had heard about that deathly silence that happens after you get your MFA, where you're alone in your garret, so to speak. And you're like, where are the deadlines? Where are the people expecting my work? Where's the feedback that I'm hungry for? And that really was the genesis of Babylon Salon. Mm-hmm. We started in 2007, and a group of us, as I said, 5 of us had graduated in 2007 and decided we needed community. And so we started Babylon Salon in the living room of a friend, which, you can have readings in your living rooms.
You can.
Which is lovely. And then we, graduated to Cantina Bar near Union Square. And we've been going really strong ever since then.
Okay. And we're going to talk more about Babylon Salon a little later. But it sounds like that was sort of one of your first big steps in finding community amongst other writers. But although I guess the MFA program was obviously predates that, right?
Absolutely. But there is a way that people, move back to where they came from, or, I don't know.
Right. Once the program is over, right.
The community dissipates. So this idea of, and Ryan and I co-host Babylon Salon, and, we do that 4 times a year, and of course are in contact much more than that. And we actually talk about writing. Not only do we talk about the shows, but we talk about our writing.
Okay, Ryan, so can you tell us how you kind of started, made your first step or two into the writing world and connecting with other writers?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in college, I was a terrible poet. I mean, just a terrible poet.
Would you like to read? Do you have a selection you'd like to read for us?
I'm going to do it right now. Yeah,
okay,
just off the cuff. It's going to be amazing. And
you lost all of your
audience.
You were one of those too. Okay, a lot of bad poetry. I've written some very bad poetry. We'll have to have
Can't go
another
wrong.
episode where we all read our horrible poetry. But go ahead, Ryan.
I don't know why we lost all your audience just now.
Yeah.
From my perspective, early on, you talked about imposter syndrome, and I think that's a very real thing for lots of writers. For me, it was trying to find sort of a space where I could feel seen, right? And you could find your ideal reader, but more than that, I think and we can talk about the MFA programs later, but you were describing something about how it feels sometimes transactional, right? And I think one of the really nice things that I've come to realize in my professional life and in my writing life is what really gives me a sense of, I don't know, purpose in some ways, is trying to be part of those situations where I can co-facilitate something that is communal, right? So that, in other words, people can bring what they have, what they hope to find, and whether that's literary performance, whether that's some of the stuff in academic work that we can talk about as well. For me, it's trying to find these spaces where, regardless of where you're at in your professional career, you feel like there's a kind of a leveling, right, where you can actually interact with people and find a way to have that be a sustaining part of your own practice.
And tell me, I mentioned a couple of very high level things that I got out of, particularly when I went to that conference, just initially, just a lot of realizations. And then I ended up with a writing group and I got support from that. But at a high level, because we are going to talk about specific ways we find community, but you just talked about getting into these groups and things and being a part of these groups and how that's helpful. But give us a couple of examples of specifically how it's helpful relative to your writing.
Well, if you don't mind my just backing up a couple of sentences, I think people talk about writing very globally, and that's useful. But the reality is there's different components to it, and the creative act of writing necessarily has to be done alone, and that can be very isolating. And then there's the connecting part, which is the community part, and then I think there's the business part, which is selling your work. And I think the connecting and the business part are very overlap quite a bit. So, in terms of the connecting part, one specific example I can give that's very recent is that I think we're going to talk more about the Writers' Grotto. I'm a very proud member of the Writers' Grotto. But during the pandemic, when everything was shut down and we weren't seeing people other than virtually, which was a lot better than nothing, an email went out and said, McSweeney's is looking for essays on the pandemic. And I thought, I can do that. I have some very concrete things to add. So, to share. So I, it was very short. It was like, I don't know, 600, 100 words, 200 words, very short. Or 600, I can't remember. But anyway, the point is I sent something off, it got published. And it was so fantastic because that was one of my goals in 2020, to hit a higher tier magazine. I had been published quite a bit. I have been published quite a bit, but I wanted to get in a high, more top-notch literary journal, and the community, the connection.
Right. The opportunity presented itself because you were part of that community.
Exactly.
Right. Ryan, any other examples of things that you might get out of being part of a community, whether it's an MFA, whether it's, again, just a high level, things that kind of apply to community in general, I guess.
Yeah, I can. So this is going to transition into talking about MFAs a bit, but let me start by saying that one of the great things about being part of a literary performance series is that instead of it having to be transactional, saying, I need something from you, right? I need a blurb. I need to curry favor in this kind of way. One of the great privileges is being able to reach out to writers who you really admire, to bring them into this space together where they can enjoy each other, and the audience feels like, again, there's that sort of opportunity to connect. But then over time, you sort of, that circle starts to widen a bit, right? So I think about what a poisonous environment Twitter can be. And yet there are some writers like, so our recent guest, Matt Bell, right, on Twitter, is amazing. He teaches at Arizona State, but that same impulse carries over into the kind of platforming he does for emerging writers on Twitter and on social media all the time. And you see that kind of, to my mind, very specific act of generosity. It doesn't have to do that, right? but you gradually start to see the kind of ripple effects, that kind of ecosystem of care, it seems to me.
And I can add to that because I now know that Matt is in Michigan. I've seen the beer that he's drinking. I've seen the tree that he planted. And the only reason I'm following him is because I saw him at your last event. That's how he got on my radar. So that's just a perfect illustration of the kind of thing that we're talking about, and how there is that domino effect, or the rippling over the pond, or whatever you want to say. So let's talk now, though. Let's transition, and we will talk about some specific examples. And we are going to start with organizations like the Grotto. There are lots of places where we can go to learn about writing, learn about craft, learn about the business, and make connections. But yeah, the San Francisco's the Writer Grotto is a great example of that. And so, Laurie, you are a member. You did briefly just touch on it, but can you touch on it again about what the organization is and what it does, sort of its mission?
The Grotto is a co-working group of roughly 125 writers. We used to have a space on 2nd Street in San Francisco, but with the pandemic, we had to let it go. So now we are a virtual community looking for another physical space, which I'm sure we'll have in the coming year. And it's journalists, it's novelists, it's essayists, it's there are some filmmakers, but memoirists, it's a wide range of writers. And it's amazing what can happen in that community. We have small groups that meet to talk about short stories. We have groups that meet about journalism. We have a book group. We have lunches. These are all virtual now, where other writers come in and talk to us. Many, I would say, Ryan, I don't know if you would agree, but many of the readers that we've had at Babylon Salon, the authors we've had read at Babylon Salon, have been or are Grotto members. It's just, and there's a listserv where, as I mentioned, these kinds of things go out. It's not just for, McSweeney's is looking for essays on the pandemic. It's like, this residency or a lot of the other areas we're going to touch on.
Right. So why did you decide to join specifically? Where were you in your career, or what desire, what motivated you to say, I want to be a part of this group?
Well, I'm an extrovert, which is not always that common with writers, but I also had a book that I had a draft of. So I was like, okay, I need to bring this to the next level. And I knew that the Writers Grotto would help me do that. And in fact, they did. And one of the other things that is really cool about the Grotto that we haven't been able, I think, I don't know if it's happening virtually. I haven't seen it, but we did it face to face, where we had I invited people to the conference room. We had a lunch, and I brought pizza, and I said, okay, here are the titles I'm thinking about for my book.
I love that. I love that.
And here are the agents I'm thinking about. And, what do you guys think? And these were people who had all published books. So that was amazingly helpful. I have to say, though, the thing that came out, the thing that really directly led to my publishing that book, World Gone Missing, was a woman that had been in a writing group of mine. And she published with this publisher. And so I checked them out, and I thought that this looks pretty good. It's Regal House Publishing. And I would recommend them for people who are listening. And I sent off my manuscript, and she, within 2 weeks got back to me.
I love that.
Awesome.
I love the idea of having I'll buy pizza if you guys will help me with my title and finding a publisher. I love that. And it also speaks to something, you mentioned that they had a physical space. You hope to get a physical space now that we're hopefully, knock on wood, emerging from the pandemic. But I think, isn't that one of the key advantages to being part of a group, is that, because I think you also had shared office space, right? So I think that there was a lot of water cooler talk, right? A lot of unplanned sort of interactions by being in a community that's sort of a day-to-day, again, office-like community even, right?
Yeah, I think we have to be honest. The writing life has its ups and downs. There's ups, and then there's times when you're just feeling low. And so I remember, I'm working on a novel now, and I have felt stuck on it. Thank God I have a draft now. It's going to be a lot easier. But the point is, I would have lunch with somebody, and they would talk to me, and I would walk away feeling like, hey, I can do this.
Right. right? The moral support is so important. Such an
Yeah.
important, yeah. Okay, so the Grotto did go virtual temporarily, hopefully, but there are a lot of groups that actually started virtually, right? Online writing groups. That's just how they exist. I'm just curious, are you, Laurie, other than what we talked about relative to the Grotto, are you a member of any online communities? And Ryan, are you? We'll go with Laurie first. Just curious. Because by the way, I'm not, but after preparing for today, I'm probably going to be because I found some that I realized, oh wait, I should probably be a member of these, but I'm not yet. So I'm curious if either of you are. Laurie?
No, I'm not. But I do want to say that there seem to be more and more of them. In Berkeley, we have left coast lit. Do I have that right? Left margin lit.
Mm-hmm.
There's just more and more, and several members of the Grotto belong to more than one. They've all gone virtual now.
Right.
But between the Grotto and my teaching classes, which we're going to talk about, I think, as being an important part of community, and my need to sequester.
You're covered. You're covered. It sounds like.
I'm covered.
Ryan, are you a member of any online virtual writing communities?
But I have been, in the early days when I was trying to figure out, whether I should write at all. I was doing, I was taking the kinds of classes that Laurie teaches right now, right? So I was taking classes at UCLA Extension, and I was also trying to do online sort of community things. So one of the earliest ones, Zoetrope, I think is sort of like a pioneer, right, in sort of like online writing communities and classes. And it's funny. I mean, now, of course, in the last year, everything has been so remote, right? Even if you really resisted the idea of that kind of online interaction, you found ways to adapt to it.
Right.
I frankly sort of long for, the days when I can actually get back together with my writing group, in person at a bar and talk, hash through it. But yeah, I mean, this is where we're at right now. And I think there are actually some affordances really to that sort of online aspect of it.
Right. So it's interesting. So you have done some in the past. And I mean, and I think we all agree that we can't wait to actually see each other again face to face. But before we go back to some examples of that, I am going to just mention some of these virtual groups that or virtual online communities. I keep saying virtual and online, which of course is redundant. These online communities, some of which looked, really interesting. One that I was already familiar with is Wattpad.com. This is a community of more than 45 million writers. I did not realize we had that many writers in the world. That's great. But 45 million writers and readers, maybe that's what helps the readers, where you can share your works in progress one chapter at a time. So I love that concept. Absolute Write Water Cooler has 68,000 members, a large and highly active community where you can find threads on every genre imaginable, discussions about freelance writing, publishing industry, writing prompts and exercises, and all that kind of stuff. Another one that is very familiar and was also on both lists is Camp NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month. And I think that's in November usually, I think. But they have a virtual camp in April and July where you can kind of do the similar thing. A lot of emphasis, it sounds like, on word count goals. So you can check out Camp NaNoWriMo. Others on the list that I'm not going to describe, just going to kind of rattle off. CritiqueCircle.com was also on both lists. Critters.org, which sounds more like a pet shop, but apparently it's for writing. Critters.org. Internet Writing Workshop.org. WritingCooperative.com, which is operated through Medium. SFFChronicles.com, which is for sci-fi writers. And Scribophile, which it says is one of the largest communities in the world. And then, of course, there are lots of Facebook groups and there are Reddit subreddits. So lots of places for those of you who are still happy to be, even in a post-pandemic world, as we move into that, if you still want to focus your efforts online. And of course, I think it's probably more a question of maybe doing a little of both, but there are some options for you. So
list.
What's that?
That's a great list.
Well, like I said, I got to give credit. I think I gave credit. Did I give credit to Writer's Digest? I don't think I did give credit. WritersDigest.com and Readsy.com's blog. So that's where I got those. And there were obviously even more on those two respective lists. So yeah, it's a great list to check out. Ryan.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No.
Just to add to that, it occurs to me that, over the last year, a lot of traditional, workshops and residencies have also developed a sort of online community platform. And I think, oftentimes these are labors of love, by by working writers, right? So the idea of a tech platform to support that, is sometimes intimidating. But for example, I know that LitCamp, right, which is
Yep.
housed at Esalen once a year. Janice Cook-Newman and Lee Daniel Kravitz have really tried to, and Emily Kathleen Cook have really tried to put together just regular spaces where people just quietly are writing
Get together
at the
and
same
write
time.
together. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And trying to find innovative ways around the geographical impediments, and frankly just kind of privilege to being able to go to a conference or a residency or something like that, right? So this idea of just having a digital space wherever you are, I think can actually be kind of empowering in certain ways.
Yeah. And since you mentioned, I'm sorry, go ahead, Laurie.
I just quickly say that these are open to all writers. You don't have to have attended LitCamp.
Right. You can sign up for their mailing list, and then they will send you a reminder. I'm on that list. They'll send you a reminder and say, hey, we're getting together and we're writing today. Join us. Since we're talking about LitCamp, though, I will also mention that they have a writing retreat this fall in Boonville. I can't remember the dates off the top of my head. So for those of you who are looking for a fit, and they're doing it, in physical reality, they're having a retreat. I think it's September. I'm almost positive it's September.
That's right.
So anyway, yeah, something to check out. So, and speaking of physical reality, like we've said a couple times, we're all really excited to get back to that. Let's talk about writing groups and actually having the writing groups in person. I think you just mentioned that you had been part of or are part of a writing group. Ryan, can you speak to kind of what you get out of that and how you find that beneficial?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think one of the great things about a writing group, it's, as Laurie said, like writing is so solitary. I had a path somewhat similar to yours, Matthew, where I just kept feeling like it was really my thing to do on my own, right? And I did my MFA at New York University, but it was a little more competitive, and we were just drinking together all the time. And a really wise friend of mine was like, drinking with writers is not writing. Feels like it, but it's not. I'll come back to that with Babylon, because I think like I found a way to like square the circle there. But ultimately, for me, a writing group means that there's accountability, right? People whose editorial instincts I really trust. But there's a community in this sort of space where you can risk something, right? You can fail spectacularly in that kind of an environment. And I think that for me is really what a writing group is really for. Like, yes, it's for knowing like someone's waiting for your pages, but it also means that you've kind of got your ideal readers there, right? That you really trust that they're not just going to sugarcoat it and be like, no, it's great, right? Like, don't ever share your work with your family. Share it with people who are going to be a bit more ruthlessly honest about.
But my mom always loves my writing. Why shouldn't I share it with my mom? She's got great feedback. She says everything I write gets just better than the last thing I wrote.
Share it with your mom and share it with other people.
Okay. All right. I feel like I've made a critical mistake. I didn't realize that. She's the only one I ever share it with. I didn't realize. Okay. Good to know. But I love what you just said, Ryan, about sharing with a group where you can fail miserably, right? Because that's part of it's that whole idea that like the first draft, I know we're talking also beyond the first draft, but that idea, it's kind of similar. We just vomit up the first draft and we silence that inner critic. And we have to do that. We have to be able to not worry about failing and not be critical at certain stages. I mean, we get critical as we go along, but I love that having 5 or 6 or 10 people who are going to tell you, we love you. We love your writing in general, but with that chapter, you just failed miserably. And here's how you cannot fail miserably. So yeah, I love that idea. Laurie, anything to add? Failing miserably, anything else that we get out of being in a writing group?
Well, I want to say I've been in a writing group physically with people. I've been on online writing groups where we had people from New York, in addition to the Bay Area, which I think was really cool, Boston. And now I'm working just one-on-one with another writer because of that first draft feeling that I had, which was, this really stinks. I don't want to show it to a lot of people because I can't take in a lot of voices right now. I can only take in one. And that has really helped me. And I think there's just so many different ways to cut this. But this idea of trusted readers and trying to define what trusted means, that's, I think, part of our evolution as a writer. Like, who do we trust with these early stinky drafts? what Annie Lamott calls, shitty first drafts. And so everyone cuts it a different way. I know we're going to talk about this, but I want to say I teach at UC Extension, and many of my writing classes have gone on to meet, not everyone in the class, but say a sizable portion, 3/4, to meet and share writing. And I think that is another springboard. You were talking about the springboard of the book passage conference, which sounded really cool. There's another springboard there.
And you just mentioned Annie Lamott, and I just read Bird by Bird for the first time. Horribly ashamed that I hadn't read it until now, but she says that specific thing as well. She teaches at Book Passage, actually. Again, I'm sure she teaches elsewhere, but she teaches at Book Passage a lot. And she talks about that same thing in Bird by Bird, about how so many of her students, after the classes, they'll go off and form their own groups, which is, like you said, it's a great springboard. So one thing I like about writing groups is when I'm looking at someone else's writing, and helping them to analyze it and critique it, I'm also honing my own craft, right? I think we can't help someone else without helping ourselves. So that's just kind of another thing that I like. But I also liked what you said, Ryan, about that accountability thing. It's nice to know that, okay, well, next week I need to have those 5 pages or 10 pages or, whatever it is. So lots of advantages to writing groups. Those are just a few. Where would you guys go to find one? Where did you go to find? We just had one good example, which is springboards from a conference or from a class. Any other examples of where we might go to find writing groups if we're just getting started? Ryan, any ideas?
It's so funny. I was going to say, apologies, because what I should say is something completely new, but what I want to really emphasize is that I came to conferences really late. It did not occur to me, and I also just didn't have the time with my workload to think about residencies and workshops. And so for me, I guess I just kind of want to double down on that for a second while I think of additional ways for people to find community. But for me,
no, I was saying specifically, where you might go to find a writing group, but go ahead.
A writing group specifically. Yeah. No, that's what I mean. That for me, one of the really interesting things was discovering that, while it was helpful to have a group of people that I've worked with, for a while, there was something about getting new readers for your work and then continuing additional sort of writing groups or writing moments or sort of exchanges with the people that you met in those environments, because you sort of saw how they were as readers and editors. And the reason that's sort of sparking for me is this idea that you really always have to be reading, right, as a writer, right? That there's something really powerfully instructive about. It's funny, right, how we can see the opportunities in other people's work that we can't see in our own, right? There's some part of the brain that we've seen the material too often. And there's something really great, I think, about the way that a small residency or workshop environment can help slingshot it forward, right? Not only do you have that excitement about oh, great, this is what this can be, and oh shit, I have to totally revise this. But also there's this idea that this is another person I can rely on, right? Or we can form a group later on. So I think what's nice is that even if you don't right now have people that you can rely on, they're out there, right? I think people want to be involved in these kinds of smaller or larger circles, or even, as Laurie said, just in sort of a pair.
Right. Yeah. And Laurie, go ahead.
I can throw out Shut Up and Write. You just Google that. And then I haven't checked lately, so I hope this is still the case. There used to be some posts on Craigslist. The other thing I would recommend is be bold. Put on your Facebook page, I'm looking for, to form a writing group. If you're interested, DM me. The thing about a writing group, though, I would say, is that you want to find the right people. So I think it's useful to check out, if you're going to organize it, check out their writing first and find, voices that seem simpatico to you and are at the same level as you. You don't want to, be with somebody who's just won, the Pulitzer, and you don't want to be somebody who has never taken a writing class or never gone to a conference.
Yep.
So, finding that mix, I think there's some screening that's involved.
I think that's such good advice. Yeah. I once took a French class, I won't say where, and I'm fluent in French. I'm not perfect, but I'm fluent. So I was taking this conversational class after I came back from France just to maintain my French. And there was a person in the class who could not put sentences together. And I'm not exaggerating. And so the rest of us who actually were conversant in French were we ended up just kind of helping that person. And then I remember the teacher told me not to help so they could do it on their own. And I was like, well, then what am I supposed to do? Because I don't have a chance to talk anyway. So just not exactly the same thing we're talking about, but just that idea of you want to make sure the people in your group, like you said, are on the same level. That's really great advice. And yeah, and ask for writing samples. And make sure that happens. Okay. Something we've talked about a couple times. You guys are both academics, both associated with Berkeley. And so I think we can all agree that there are lots of advantages to education. So we're just going to assume we're cool with that. But what are some of the advantages specifically related to being a writer and finding community and getting support that academia might offer, whether that's an MFA program, whether that's an extension class, that maybe we can't necessarily get elsewhere? Ryan, thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I have lots of thoughts on it. First of all,
I thought you might.
We were saying before we started recording, I feel so privileged, right, to teach at UC Berkeley and to work with primarily undergraduates, right, at a whole range and a whole spectrum of backgrounds, and it's enormously animating for me, right, and so much of the work that I do involves setting up environments, right, for community and collaboration between students, between faculty, and a variety of other capacities. But I also want to say with MFAs, and maybe people have heard this before, but you don't need an MFA to be a writer. You really don't, right? You need time, and you need, that space, right? Virginia Woolf's, you need your room, and you need to be able to have that space. And that's, like we said, that's kind of a privilege to be able to have time and space and focus. But what the MFA for me did was I realized that it is this academic environment in which, for a relatively short period of time, you do develop, your trusted set of readers to a certain degree, and you realize that every writer procrastinates, right? That every writer feels some kind of imposter syndrome, And so I think there is something about immersing yourself in the craft of it that can be enormously powerful. One caveat that I'd say, though, is, I was so focused on getting into an MFA program after hopping around in different careers. I was really let in too early. I tell my students, I actually got in too early before I really had something meaningful to say on the page. And I got to New York, and I'm very excited to be in New York, and utterly terrified by the professional, the professional development part of what was really, available to me. If I could do it again, there's so much that I would do differently. Right?
And is that where the drinking came in? That's where the drinking
absolutely came in. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. There was someone in our program actually who, every time we would say, all right, let's all get together. It's bonding. It's very important. And she would say, no, thank you. And then, about a year and a half in, she announced her 2-book deal. Right. And everyone was very, very jealous and very skeptical. And that's where the drinking, with writers and not writing thing comes in, because it's like you want to set up these boundaries for yourself, right? And I think an academic environment gives you the kind of structure, the permission structure to pursue that, right? And to learn things that maybe, some of the most interesting writers come from backgrounds that have nothing to do, in theory, with literature, right? They love reading, they love writing.
Right.
So that can be great. But if, or like a low res MFA, I have friends who are currently immersed in those programs, and they're great, right? Because you can continue to do your work and do this. But for me, I would say, ultimately, that side of the academic experience is, it was absolutely transformative. And also, I wish that I'd approached it, like a job,
right?
Really, because that's really what it's meant to be. It's like mechanics school for writing.
Still takes discipline. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Laurie, your thoughts on academia and community?
So would you like me to speak from the vantage point as a student or as a teacher?
Yes.
Okay. So let me just start as a teacher. As a teacher of writing, what I hope my students get is a safe space to write, that idea of encouragement, without it being all rainbows and unicorns. I mean, we're not going to say, oh yeah, that was just lovely, when it was, it needs work. But I work very hard from the teacher's point of view, I work really hard to create that space. And then I set up a number of kind of guidelines about how we share work, so that that is hopefully realized. And then as a teacher, I have to say, I want to say really clearly that I get a lot out of reading that work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it's just what it kind of is an echo of what Ryan was saying on a different level. I mean, these students are sharing their perspectives with me, with all of us in the class. And some of them are just like so amazing. And, you know, I have students from 80 years old, this is at UC Extension, to, 20, just graduated from college. And so all of those perspectives are so fascinating. We also discuss works of literature, and that's really the same thing. I get different insights. As a student of writing, I still take classes.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of use them to zero in on an area that I need help with. The beginning of my novel was not what I wanted it to be, so I took a class at the Grotto on the first 10 pages. That was super helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same thing. I'm like looking at how other people are starting. I'm listening to this novelist who's teaching the class, and I'm thinking, wow, there are different ways to cut this, but I need to up my game.
Right.
So what else would I add to that? Take a class where community is emphasized if you can.
Mm-hmm.
There are classes where the teachers are more, they want to stand up, they want to lecture or, virtually lecture. I think this idea of maximizing the interaction between the students, giving students a chance to making sure that we have really simple things, making sure everyone has everyone else's email. I mean, just silly things like that is really important. And that's the kind of class you want to get. And
I love that.
Don't feel shy. As I said, don't feel shy after the class. Okay, now here's another virtue is that you've heard their writing. Mm-hmm. So it isn't cold. You can say, wow, you can reach out to someone and say, I'd love to be in a writing group with you.
Right.
How about we meet every Wednesday, hopefully over coffee sometime soon.
Hopefully over coffee very soon or drinks very soon. Speaking of drinks, you were having Babylon Salon before the pandemic, just around the corner from my house at, what's the name? The Kink Bar. Is that what it is? No, what was it called?
The Armory.
The Armory, which
Club.
used to be associated with.
It has a big K.
It has a big K. That's why I think I had that association. Okay. Anyway, so let's talk about Babylon Salon as just one example of literary events, literary series, and how great they can be for fostering community. I mean, first of all, that's why we're here today. Actually, Laurie, I met you. I don't know if we met, but you were at. I saw you at Lit Wings, Aaron Burns' Lit Wings in Sausalito. I don't know if we actually met, but that's where I first saw you. But I met Ryan, through Babylon Salon, and of course, Laurie, I've gotten to know you better through Babylon Salon. So anyway. Can you just tell us, Laurie, and I guess you already did, but since we're going to talk about it, just give us
I have a story, actually.
Oh, you have a story? Okay, give us a quick story. Yeah.
Ryan and I both taught at UC Berkeley in the college writing program. And I went to a reading that he was reading, and he knocked my socks off with what he read. And I'm not, this is no BS. And then I invited him to read at Babylon Salon. And then when a host opening came up, I thought of him. Mm-hmm. And he read several times. So that to me is the way how, that's kind of how community can work too, is you go to a reading, you meet people, you get, we cannot underestimate the amount of inspiration. Well, I don't know, Matt, you should speak to it, but I always come away from our Babylon Salon shows feeling inspired. And I have a little notebook that I scribble on.
No, I have that right here in my notes. I have literally in my notes, bullet point, inspiration, sub bullet. I always come away from the event wanting to get back to writing. Yeah. So yes, that is exactly one of the points that I was going to make is, first of all, I love your event in particular. I love, there are different events that I go to, but yours, I try to attend religiously because you guys, first of all, you do such an amazing job at curating. I mean, you really do. And but it's just great for me for two main reasons. One is, I mean, probably more than that, but two that come to mind. One is the inspiration. I'm always just pumped afterwards. I'm always like, wait, why haven't I written yet today? I've got to go get back to whatever I'm working on. One, which I think such events should do ideally, but also it's just really great to get exposed to a lot of the writers that you're bringing to the event that I might not know otherwise. And I just find that really valuable and really, really inspiring. Ryan, what else do you think?
Can I just add that litscene.com by Evan Karp is the best website.
Quiet Lightning. Well, he does Quiet Lightning, right?
Yeah, but he has a website, or nonprofit that he's a part of has a website, and you can check out readings, and there are many, many more than people realize, and there's got to be one in your neighborhood.
Right. Well, there is, but it's just not at the bar yet. And I'm waiting for you to show back up. I'm waiting for you to show back up in my neighborhood. Ryan, anything to add insofar as what these sorts of events can bring to us as writers?
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I just want to say from the beginning is it was such an honor to be asked by Laurie, one of the original co-founders of Babylon, to sort of join that group at exactly the moment when I felt maybe most removed from community. All right, I was just really immersed in professional stuff, and so it really helped to open up for me the chance to reach out and talk to writers where you have this kind of reciprocity. You're giving them a chance to whatever, maybe help them sell some of their books or to give them some exposure. But really, what happens is you're providing that moment, right? That kind of electric moment. When we're all in the basement of some bar or online in Zoom. And one of the things I think that has been really interesting, the group has changed over the years and it's expanded, right, with other people that we adore, right, that we've met along the way. And I think that's been really exciting as well. But to give you a sense, since Laurie maybe wouldn't brag about this, in the last couple of years, we had Douglas Stewart, we had Natalie Bazile, we had Charles Yu, Jamel Brinkley, Jenny Odell, Tommy Orange, Ingrid Rojas Contreras, Justin Torres. It's such an exciting opportunity.
I haven't heard of any of those people.
No, terrible writers.
No, I think that's probably why Laurie didn't bring it up, because nobody knows those people. Nobody knows those people.
But I want to say those are the headliners, but there have been emerging writers that have knocked all of our socks off.
Absolutely.
So, and there's something that happens during Babylon that is magic. I don't know what it is, but by the end of the evening, there is this deep feeling of community. I mean, please correct me if you disagree, but I feel it every time, even virtually.
Yes. Well, for me, it's the 3 gin tonics when it's at the bar. But Ryan, we did interrupt you. You were about to.
Excuse me, Ryan.
We both did. No. We both did. We overwhelmed him. You were going to finish a thought. Maybe we made
with you. Everyone gets so excited about this is precisely the point, right? Yeah, we should go to these events. I think it's hard so what I was going to say is that we're free, right? We have no income with which to compensate readers. It's just love and maybe buying them a drink at the bar, right? And you'd be surprised how many people are willing to go along with that. And even now in the pandemic, one of the interesting trade-offs is that then we can reach out to people in different time zones. We had a reader recently calling in from Italy, right, and from New York and wherever, and those audiences as well. Yeah, and I think it's a nice thing. I think so often, so many groups have been under financial strain or logistical strain. People move away. It's nice to have. I mean, God, I don't know. I think we might be one of the longest running performance series in the Bay Area at this point, which is a testament to Laurie and to Maury Zeff, one of the co-founders as well. Before we leave the topic entirely, though, I want to give a shout out. Evan Karp also runs the events at Booksmith, and we partner with Booksmith, to make sure that if anyone's going to buy it at an indie bookstore, right, like consider the Booksmith among others. And I just think there's also something really wonderful about the way that indie bookstores form this other hub, of community for writers, for emerging writers, for established writers. One of the best pieces of advice that I got in my MFA, which I try to carry forward into Babylon, is this idea of, the dead writers, they don't need your support quite as much as the living writers, the ones who are really trying to make it with their first book, their second book, right?
So you don't believe in past lives? You don't believe in past lives?
I mean,
I'm kidding.
that's
I'm
a whole,
kidding. I'm
that's a
kidding.
whole other thing. Can you imagine?
That's a different episode.
Right.
Can I put a plug in for our June 5th Babylon Salon?
Laurie, please rest assured that we will be ending this session with
Awesome.
a plug for Babylon Salon June 5th. Of course, I thought of that.
Oh, thank you.
So stay tuned for the plug. Stay tuned for the plug. But I'm going to use this break in the flow to transition to conferences, just in the interest of time, because I am watching the clock, of course. I've already mentioned how much of an impact the book passage travel writers and photographers, that's a long one, conference had just on getting me started insofar as finding my own community. But of course, now here we are with the San Francisco Writers Conference podcast. And Laura, you spoke at least once. I went to your session at last year's conference. So can you just tell us a little bit about the importance of conferences to writers?
Well, conferences are fantastic, and there's different kinds. I mean, I have been a lecturer at the San Francisco Writers Conference where people are listening to craft talks, being inspired by people like Walter Mosley. And then I've also been to Squaw Valley Writers Conference, Tin House, and Lit Camp, where you're actually sharing writing and you're getting critique on your writing, as well as hearing speakers. But it's a lot of what we've been talking about. It's a place to meet other writers, to hear their work, to get inspired, to connect, and to create, a few, it doesn't have to be a lot, a few ongoing connections that you can, that will serve you well as you move forward in your career as a writer or in your life as a writer.
Right. Ryan, you went to the Breadloaf Environmental Writers Conference in 2020. Can you share some of your thoughts on what you get out of attending conferences as a writer?
Absolutely. No, so ironically, the Breadloaf Environmental has been delayed. It's coming up next month for me. I finally get to do it.
Oh, okay.
Alas,
well, you've been to
not
other
in
ones,
Vermont.
though.
I have. I did just last January, I did the Tin House workshop that Genevieve Hudson, who wrote Boys of Alabama, she was our workshop leader and phenomenal. I did Lit Camp at Sloan a couple of years ago, met a bunch of people, Jonathan Lethem and Earl Kwan, and a bunch of really smart writers were there. My absolute favorite, like hands down, blows any other kind of conference or residency out of the water, so to speak, was the Arctic Circle residency.
Yeah.
Where we were on a masted tall ship sailing in the Arctic around Svalbard, above Norway, closer to the North Pole than we were to any, real settlement. Not a lot of writing got done. No one.
That's what I was just going to say. This sounds oddly reminiscent of the whole drinking issue during the MFA problem. I'm guessing.
I have a picture. I mean, there's a picture on Facebook of Ryan jumping off the boat into sub-freezing wet water. A lot of experiences.
All the warmth just punches right out of your body, but you did it. You can say you did it on the summer solstice. One thing that I would say is that there are some residencies and workshops, right, where you are absolutely given quiet space, right? So these are residencies as opposed to workshops, right?
That's fine. Sure.
You are given your own space to write and to work, and oftentimes there are scholarships or fellowships or ways to make sure that it's accessible for you. Something like the Arctic Circle, which I absolutely recommend people think about, it's focused on environmental issues, but it was more sort of tactile and immersive in a way that I think I didn't realize, but it provides so much new inspiration. So I did get some writing done, but I also, it was a mixture of scientists and cross-disciplinary artists. Mm-hmm. And so I think one of the things that a program like that does and what other things do, it reminds me of the value, not just of writing focused passions, but also getting the most out of the kinds of things that you love that don't have anything to do with writing, right? Or cut across other artistic disciplines. The kind of cross-pollination is so thrilling, So I would say whatever other things people are passionate about, lean into those things as well. It's funny, the ways that it doubles back into your writing life.
Right. And I think being on a boat with people for however long that was, and then Laurie, like you said, again, it comes back to something we talked about earlier for me, which is there are real benefits of being with people in physical reality. Because for me, that's the biggest thing about the conference, right? Any conference is getting to have that face-to-face interaction, because we're so grateful and we're so lucky that we've had this virtual world the past year, but there's still something different about. And, for example, for you, Ryan, in the case when you're sharing that week or whatever it was on that boat, I mean, that creates a certain bond. You guys had that really special experience that's going to bring you together, you know, in a way that's going to be lasting. And it's the same. I made so many contacts and so many friends that I'm now, you know, in touch with on a regular basis at the last conference and at the Book Passage conference. And so I love that there is that value, I think, still. We're still humans in the physical world, in material reality. And I think there's something still to that, right?
Oh yeah. Well, just to say, we were on there for a month.
A month.
There's something about,
oh, wow.
There's something about being trapped with other people on this vessel, you know, or even going for hikes with them, you know, in these sort of barren landscapes. We've been in the trenches literally together, and that's something that I feel like you can't, you know, it's sort of indelible in that kind of way. And yeah, you get tired of people after a while.
That's what I was just going to say. Actually, those people you might not ever want to talk to again. That might have been a horrible example. After a month of not showering and smelling like a polar bear, yeah, you might not actually. Yeah. Their
family. That's it. It takes a turn from polite friends to they are family in a particular way.
One additional tip I would share is a friend of mine, Julie Lithcott-Hames, who was a member of the Grotto. When she writes a book, she keeps an Excel spreadsheet of everyone she talks to, whether she's interviewing them, whether they're helping her do research, whether that she talked to them extensively about her book. And then she looks back when she's ready to launch her book, and she reaches out to those specific people. And that, in a way, is her creating that community of people already anticipating her book.
I love that. That's it. That's
She's
a great.
Super sharp.
Yeah, sounds
Julie
like it.
Lithcott-Hames.
All right, check her out. I'm sure there's more that we could talk about, but I think we've kind of covered the big ones, unless either of you can think of anything glaringly obvious that we've left out insofar as ways of fomenting community. But I think we've covered most of them. Any last minute thoughts before I plug Babylon so that Laurie knows that I've done my part?
I have a thing.
Yeah.
I have a thing. And then Laurie, we can jump to yours next. I just want to say, for anyone who's watching or listening who, like me, is a high functioning introvert, right? That there's something like the last year has been a challenge, but we've emphasized a lot about like how great it's going to be to see people in person. I also want to emphasize for people the fact that it's okay to set boundaries and decide sort of like how much you want to really get back in. We're in sort of uncharted waters. I just, as an example, went this last weekend to like a birthday party in the open, right, at like a park in Oakland. And there was like 50 people and they didn't have masks. Well, their masks were down, right? And they're all hugging. And about half an hour in, I felt giddy. And then half hour after that, I told my partner, I was like, I gotta go. I gotta bail.
Right.
And I think that's something that's worth keeping in mind for people, right? That like community is where you kind of want to be or need to be. And like we have a better language than we used to, I hope, for figuring out where people are at. You know?
Absolutely.
And so it doesn't all have to be an crowded bar immediately.
No, you make you make several really good points, but the one I'm going to hone in on is, what we've done here today is just talk about options, right? Yeah. But yeah, you might decide, you know what, I'm actually really happy in my garret right now because that's where I am in my process. Like Laurie talked about initially, when we're just writing, it is like, that is where we want to be. We're not necessarily ready yet to have people critiquing us or getting input. So maybe I just want to go to Babylon Salon once a quarter for the next year. Maybe that's enough for me, related to community, because that's where I am in my process. So that's a really good point. And then later on, maybe I'm getting closer to promoting my book and I'm ready just to I want to know, I'm just curious what else is going on out there. Then I start going to more events and I do a writing group because I'm, so yeah, great point. Laurie, any parting thoughts?
I just want to circle back to this idea of, Matt, you make such an excellent point of knowing what stage you're at and what you need at a certain time. I think that is really important. We don't want to rush out and connect if we're not feeling it. And we don't want to necessarily isolate either. So it's just like writing. It's something about, you have to develop your own vision of this, just as you have to develop your own vision as a writer.
Yep.
But I want to say it's amazing what can happen if you do reach out. And I want to encourage people to be bold and not wait for community to come to them, but to reach out, via Facebook or via friends or, I don't know, classified ads. I don't know. So many different ways.
Yeah. And that's the point, right? I just talked about this on my last episode with Joanna Penn. We talked about just the importance of, and I said this in my intro today, right? It's just taking that one action.
Yeah.
And
I
it doesn't
love
necessarily,
that.
and
I
it
love
doesn't
that.
necessarily, thank you. Yeah, it doesn't necessarily even matter what the action is, but it's taking that one action, because it's not going to come to you. People aren't necessarily going to find you, because the garret has so many padlocks and you have to go up those long windy steps and all that. So yeah, take one action and let it start happening. Go to a conference, join a writing group, go to literary events, try some of the other things we've talked about today. Guarantee all three of us, if I can speak for both of you guys, we assure you, you will not regret it. And you'll get a lot of good out of it. I think I feel very comfortable saying that. So thank you very much, Laurie. Thanks for making the time. Appreciate you being here. Thank you, Ryan, so much for joining us. And so for more about Ryan, you can check out, actually, I'm going to let you each, so that you come back on camera, I'm going to let you each say your website. So Laurie, Ryan, actually, it doesn't matter. Laurie, where do people go to find out about you and World Gone Missing?
LaurieAnnDoyle.com. And I do want to plug Babylon Salon, if you don't mind.
Go for it. And so what I was going to say is, I was also going to mention who you have lined up. So yeah, do the plug. Go for it.
Oh, well, I'm going to pass that back to you. LaurieAnnDoyle.com.
Okay. Ryan, where do people go to find out information about you?
Yep, just rrsloan, rrsloan.com.
Okay, perfect. Babylon Salon is at babylonsalon.com. The next event is just around the corner, June 5th at 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern. And the lineup is as follows. Correct me if anything's changed, but as of your last posting on the website, and I didn't practice pronouncing these names, so sorry in advance if I get them messed up or if I mess them up. Disha Filia, is that right? The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. Meredith Talusan, Fairest, a memoir. Joshua Moore, Model Citizen, a memoir. Emily Copley Eisenberg, The Third Rainbow Girl. And you have music with Sunshine Becker. And that's another thing that I do love about your events. You also, in addition to amazing writers, you get amazing musicians. I mean, seriously, there was I think it was the last guy just had this amazing voice. And then there was the woman who, and I'm sorry, I'm not going to remember their names. There was the woman associated with Jefferson Airplane.
Yeah.
Who was just so soulful. Every time you guys, then there was the Broadway guy. And I mean, so really, really great. So
Dominic Lim.
Those
people, and he was a student of mine. And now he's a member of the Grotto and has an agent for his novel.
Excellent. Okay. So anyway, go for the writing, stay for the music. Babylon Salon, June 5th Saturday, June 5th at 5 p.m. Pacific. Thanks again, Laurie. Thanks again, Ryan. I'm Matthew Félix.
Thank you.
More about me at MatthewFélix.com, and more about the San Francisco Writers Conference, including details of this year's new and expanded writing contest, as well as lots of ongoing virtual events, are at sfwriters.org. Until next time, thanks again for joining us.